a deadly storm, a distant planet, and a single knock at the door changes everything. Rowan, a reclusive engineer, is warned to stay locked inside, because something dangerous is out there. But when a trembling voice begs for help, he's forced to make an impossible choice. What do you do when the one asking for mercy is the very thing you're told to fear? This isn't just survival, it's a test of humanity. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The wind howled like a living creature across the frozen plains of Nema 4. Snow slammed against the metal walls of the small outpost where Rowan lived, each gust rattling the shelter as though it might peel apart. He sat alone by a narrow window, sipping lukewarm tea from a metal cup, watching the storm dance in blinding waves of white. The only sound inside was the soft hum of the heater, struggling to keep the cold at bay. Out here, silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a warning. Rowan had chosen this life. A systems engineer by trade, he'd volunteered for off-world repairs at the edge of colonized space. Fewer people meant fewer distractions. That was the point. After everything that happened on Earth, he didn't want noise or questions anymore. Just cold, clean solitude. The radio crackled to life. A static-filled voice broke the stillness. Attention all personnel. Do not leave your shelters. I repeat, stay inside. Lock your doors. A Valari subject has escaped containment. She is unstable, dangerous. Do not open your doors for any reason. Rowan stared at the speaker as the voice faded. He had heard stories about the Valari. Tall, alien, unpredictable. They shared the planet but not the trust of human settlers. Rumors said that when the Valari females entered a phase called the flare, they lost control, becoming aggressive, not by choice but by nature. People said they were too powerful, too emotional, too dangerous. He set the tea down and rubbed the back of his neck. Warnings were common enough out here. The labs experimented on Valari biology, pushing limits they didn't fully understand. Something always went wrong. Still, no one had ever knocked on his door during a storm like this. Outside, the blizzard was growing stronger. The power flickered once, then held steady. He stood and checked the locks on his door. They were solid, reinforced. This outpost was built for weather much worse than this. He was miles from the nearest neighbor with no scheduled visits for 2 more days. Whatever trouble was out there, it had nothing to do with him. He picked up a book, something old from Earth, and settled back into the chair by the window. The storm outside roared like a beast trying to tear its way in, but Rowan forced himself to focus on the pages. He liked this part of the day, quiet, disconnected, safe. An hour passed, then came the sound that made his blood turn cold. A knock, 3 slow taps on the metal door. Rowan froze. He looked up from his book, ears straining in the sudden silence. That followed. The knock wasn't loud, but it was real. He stood slowly, placing the book aside, his heart thudding in his chest. It had to be a mistake. No one should be outside. Not in this storm, not after that warning. A second knock came, softer, hesitant. He moved toward the door and reached for the sidearm on the shelf. It wasn't much, just a compact plasma tool used mostly to scare off scavengers, but it made him feel less exposed. He didn't open the door, his voice was firm, steady. Who's there? A pause. Then a voice, barely above a whisper, filtered through the thick door. It was feminine, trembling. Please, I need help, I'm freezing, I can't stay out here. Rowan's grip tightened on the weapon. Are you Valari? Silence. Then, yes. But I won't hurt you, I swear. Everything inside him screamed to keep the door locked. He remembered the stories, the flare phase, the warning. No one ever survived contact during that time. But there was something in her voice. Not rage, not aggression. It was fear. Pure, helpless fear. He looked through the peephole. The figure, outside, was tall, hunched against the wind. Her skin was a deep violet shade, her long hair soaked and tangled with snow. One side of her body armor looked burned, blackened. Her eyes, glowing faintly silver, locked with his. They weren't wild. They were terrified. Rowan stood there for a long moment, his hand still on the lock, his mind torn. Everything logical said to ignore her. Let the storm take her. He owed nothing to a stranger, especially not one known to be unstable. But something deeper in him stirred. He remembered what it felt like to be alone, scared, and running out of time. He unlocked the door. Cold air exploded into the room as he opened it a crack. The Valari girl stumbled forward, barely catching herself before falling face first to the floor. Rowan stepped aside quickly and closed the door behind her, locking it again. She collapsed to her knees, wrapping her arms around herself. Her whole body shook violently. "Thank you," she whispered through chattering teeth. Rowan didn't reply. He kept the weapon at his side and watched her carefully. She was clearly trying to stay still, to remain calm, but her body was trembling from more than just the cold. Her skin shimmered faintly, like heat waves rising off pavement in summer. He had let her in, and now there was no going back. The shelter felt smaller with her inside. The storm outside still screamed against the metal walls, but Rowan barely noticed it now. His eyes stayed fixed on the Valari girl who had collapsed on his floor. She hadn't moved much since stepping in. Her arms stayed wrapped tightly around herself, and her breaths came out fast and shallow. She looked exhausted, like her body was near its limit. The faint shimmer on her violet skin pulsed in waves, almost like a heartbeat, and a strange warmth filled the air around her. He could feel it even from across the room. Rowan stayed standing, his sidearm loose but ready in his hand. He didn't want to use it. He wasn't even sure it would do anything against a Valari in the flare, but it gave him a sense of control in a situation that felt far from safe. He watched her closely, looking for any sudden movement or change in her eyes. She didn't look violent, not yet. She looked like someone trying desperately to hold herself together. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. She lifted her head slowly. Her silver eyes glowed in the dim light. "Seren." Her voice cracked as she said it, like she hadn't spoken in hours. Maybe longer. Rowan nodded slightly, then motioned toward the small mat near the heater. "You can sit there. It's warmer." She didn't speak, just crawled slowly toward the spot, every movement careful and tense. She settled beside the heater, pulling his spare blanket over her shoulders with shaking hands. Even from a few steps away, Rowan could see the sweat starting to bead on her forehead. It didn't match the cold outside. Her body was overheating. "I need to know if you're in the flare," he said carefully. Seren hesitated. "Yes, but I'm fighting it. I'm not like the ones they talk about. That's what the stories always say." "I know." Her voice lowered. "But I didn't choose this." He stayed quiet. She wasn't trying to convince him with big promises or false calm. If anything, she looked ashamed, like she hated her own body for what it was doing. He set the weapon down on a table, but not out of reach, and stepped into the small kitchen. He grabbed a bottle of water and some emergency rations. Nothing fancy, just warm broth and bread, but it was something. He brought it over slowly, watching her for any change. Her hands trembled as she took the cup. She tried to say thank you, but the words came out as a whisper. She drank slowly, as if every drop helped pull her back from the edge. "You said they were coming for you," he said after a moment. She nodded, eyes lowered. "They track the flare signals. I ran from one of their outposts. They triggered it early." Rowan felt something twist in his chest. "They forced it?" Serene nodded again. "They wanted to see how long I could resist, how much stress I could handle before I lost control. They watched, took notes. I heard them laughing sometimes." His hands tightened into fists. He had heard rumors of experiments on Valari, of secret labs pushing limits, but most people didn't talk about it. It was easier to label the Valari as threats than admit what had been done to them. "I escaped when the power failed during a storm," she said. "I thought I could outrun them. But the flare started too soon. Rowan didn't speak right away. He sat on a bench across from her and watched her face. There was pain there. Real pain, not just physical. She looked tired in a way that went beyond her muscles or her glowing skin. It was the look of someone who had been hunted, used, and left alone. "You can stay here for the night," he said quietly. "But if you feel like you're losing control, you have to tell me." "I will," Seren said. "I don't want to hurt anyone." "Good. I need to believe that." She wrapped the blanket tighter around her and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slow and deep. The heater hummed beside her, the only sound between them. Outside, the wind shifted, throwing ice against the walls. The storm wasn't ending anytime soon. Rowan checked the scanner on the console. No nearby signals. But that didn't mean much. Tracking tech could be subtle, and he didn't trust the system to warn him in time. He looked over at her again. She was sitting quietly, her body shaking slightly, but her claws stayed retracted. Her breathing was slow, not ragged. Her posture was defensive, not aggressive. So far, she was holding on. Rowan leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He had no idea what he had just invited into his shelter, but something about the way she knocked, soft, scared, desperate, had reminded him of himself. Back when he was on Earth, when the world felt like it was crumbling and no one answered his calls. Maybe that's why he'd opened the door. Maybe it wasn't about trust. Maybe it was about refusing to be like the people who had once turned their backs on him. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle over them. The danger wasn't gone. But for now, neither of them was alone. The storm outside hadn't let up. If anything, it had grown worse, as if the planet itself was trying to bury everything beneath ice and silence. Inside the shelter, the heat struggled to keep the cold at bay. The walls creaked under the weight of snow, and the wind wailed like something alive. Rowan barely noticed anymore. His focus was on the girl by the heater. Serene hadn't moved much. She sat wrapped in his old blanket, her knees pulled to her chest, eyes half closed. Her skin still shimmered faintly, pulsing with inner heat, and thin beads of sweat ran down her temples. Rowan knew she was fighting the flare. He could see it in the way her jaw clenched, in the tension in her shoulders, in every slow, careful breath she took. She was doing everything she could to stay calm. That alone told him more than any words ever could. He sat on the opposite side of the room, cleaning the small sidearm he had kept nearby. Not out of fear anymore, but habit. He wasn't sure if he'd even use it now. Not after hearing her speak. Not after seeing the look in her eyes. She wasn't just another alien caught in a biological storm. She was a person, afraid and alone, trapped inside a body that wouldn't listen to her mind. "You need anything?" he asked quietly. She opened her eyes and looked at him, silver and glowing. "More water, maybe?" He stood and grabbed a bottle from the supplies. Her hands were trembling when she reached out, the bottle nearly slipping from her fingers. He stepped closer and helped steady it, their hands touching for a brief second. Her skin burned to the touch, not dangerously, but hot enough to feel unnatural. "How long have you been running?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost count. I barely slept. Kept moving. Kept hiding. The cycle started while I was still inside the lab. I broke out when I felt it coming. Rowan sat down beside her, not too close, but no longer on the other side of the room. He studied her face. The glow in her skin, the shaking in her limbs. She was close to the edge, but she was still in control. That meant something. "They started it on purpose," she said, staring at the floor. "They wanted to measure how long I could resist it. How long until I lost control. They triggered it early with injections and stress. They called it a test." Rowan clenched his jaw. "The labs are supposed to be shut down. What they're doing, it's illegal." She nodded. "Doesn't stop them. Out here, the laws are far away. There's no one to check. No one to care." "What did you do when you escaped?" I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't mean to set the fire. It just happened." The heat builds up inside. If it doesn't get released, it turns into something else. He didn't need her to explain it further. He had seen what flare victims could do. Walls melted, structures torn apart. It wasn't just aggression. It was instinct turned into a weapon, and still she had run. Still she had knocked gently on his door. You've been trying to stop it ever since. Seren nodded. I don't want to be what they made me. I just want to survive this without losing myself. Rowan watched her, quiet for a long time. Everything about her said danger, but everything she did said otherwise. She hadn't lashed out, hadn't made demands, hadn't lost control. She had come to him for help, and she was still fighting the thing inside her with all she had left. The scanner on the wall beeped softly. A signal flashed across the screen, a small drone flying low through the storm. It wasn't from the colony. Rowan knew their codes. This one was private, silent, and probably equipped with heat tracking. They're looking for you, he said. Seren didn't even look up. I know. Rowan walked over to the scanner and switched off his shelter's beacon. It was a risk. Without it, he'd be invisible to rescue teams if something went wrong, but it would also hide her signal. For now, that mattered more. He turned back to her. I'm not turning you in. She looked up, her face softening. Why? Because you're trying. Because you knocked like a person, not a threat. And because I've been where you are, even if I don't look like it. Seren blinked slowly, her body still trembling, her thoughts clearly racing. A tear slipped down her cheek, glowing faintly and sizzled as it touched the metal floor. Rowan didn't say anything else. He just sat down near the heater with her and waited. The wind outside screamed, but the silence between them was something different now, something warmer. Two strangers trapped in a storm, hunted by the world outside, but human in a way that had nothing to do with species or skin. For the first time in days, Seren leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, her breathing deep and slow. She wasn't safe, not completely, but she wasn't alone anymore. Dawn arrived slowly on Nema 4, hidden behind thick clouds and layers of swirling snow. The light that reached the shelter was dull and gray, like a faded memory of morning. But it was enough. Enough to remind Rowan that the storm wouldn't last forever. The wind outside had started to calm, just slightly, and the endless roar had softened to a steady whisper. The worst was passing, but the cold still pressed hard against the walls. Inside, the heater hummed on, filling the small space with a thin warmth. Seren hadn't slept much through the night. She'd curled up near the heater, her body shaking from the heat inside her, and the fear that never left. Rowan had stayed, nearby, sitting quietly with the sidearm close but untouched. Every so often she'd twitch or whisper something in a language he didn't know. Once she'd cried in her sleep, just a soft sound like someone trying to hold in pain they couldn't stop. He hadn't tried to wake her. All he could do was be there, watching the door, listening to the storm, and waiting. When her eyes finally opened, they looked clearer, less foggy. The silver glow was still there, but the pulse was slower, steadier. She looked at him, not startled, just tired. You stayed up, she said quietly. Rowan nodded. Didn't feel right to sleep. You were watching in case I lost control. No, he replied. I was watching in case you needed someone. She didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened around the blanket and her eyes dropped to the floor. I think the flare is ending, she whispered. I can feel it fading. The fire is still there, but it's not boiling anymore. That's good, Rowan said. She nodded, but her expression stayed tense. They'll still come, even if it passes. They'll find the drone signal. They'll know I was here. I turned off my beacon. Her eyes widened. You what? I disabled my location signal. It hides your heat signature too, at least for now. But that puts you at risk. If something goes wrong. Rowan gave a small shrug. I've been living out here alone for a reason. Nobody comes to check on me. Nobody really notices if I vanish for a while. Seren looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read something deeper in his face. Why? Are you helping me? Because you asked. That's it? You knocked. You didn't break in. You begged for help when you could have forced your way through. That means something. Seren blinked and turned her head away, swallowing hard. Most humans wouldn't have opened the door. I'm not most humans. Silence settled between them again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not fear, not suspicion. Something gentler, something that had been built over hours of trust held together by thin threads and cold nights. Rowan stood up and stretched his arms. I've been thinking. There's a place west of here, an old supply tunnel. It's abandoned now, but deep underground. If we make it there, you could hide for a while, long enough for the scans to stop. Seren stared at him, eyes narrowing with disbelief. You want to help me escape? You helped yourself, he said. I'm just giving you a better chance. But why? You don't even know me. Rowan paused. Maybe I see someone who didn't get a choice. Someone who's trying to take their life back even when everything's against them. She looked down at her hands, hands that had once burned with uncontrolled power. Now they were still. No claws. No heat surging through her veins. Just trembling fingers and quiet hope. I won't forget this, she said softly. You're not meant to, he replied. They spent the next hour gathering supplies. Rowan packed food, water, a small heater core, and medical gel. Seren moved slowly, but with more control than before. Her steps were steady, her breathing calm. The worst was behind her, and she knew it. But she also knew what might still lie ahead. As they stood near the shelter door, Rowan pulled on his heavy coat and looked at her. You ready? She nodded. As I'll ever be. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and unforgiving. The world outside was still white, still dangerous. But it was also quiet. The storm had passed. In its place was a stillness that felt almost sacred. They stepped out together, their boots sinking into the snow. Seren pulled the hood of her coat over her head, shielding her silver eyes from the wind. Rowan carried the pack. They walked in, silence, side by side, two figures heading into a vast, uncertain world. Behind them, the shelter stood alone, its door closed once more, but something had changed inside. The space that had once held only silence now held the memory of kindness, fear, and a promise. They didn't speak as they moved forward, but the message was clear. He had opened the door once, and now he would not let her walk alone. Not this time. Not ever again.